Okay, thank you for attending NACD's Fall 2021 Forestry webinar series. The NACD Forestry Resource Policy Group organizes 2 webinars each year like this, one in the fall and one in the spring. I think today we have 2 really good topics and a strong collection of presenters. I'd also mention that NACD, in addition to the Forestry Resource Policy Group, has an Invasives RPG. And so we've worked in conjunction with that group for this presentation that you're about to see now. The session's being recorded and can be viewed later on NACD's website. Before we begin, a few reminders for everyone. Please stay on mute during the presentations. We'll have a question and answer session at the end, but I would encourage you as we go along, feel free to enter your questions in the chat function. I'll try to keep track of those as we go, and I'll help guide that Q&A session at the end. Also, this session has been approved for 2 CFE credits through the Society of American Foresters. A list of attendees will be sent to SAF after this webinar, but if you have any questions or troubles with that, feel free to email me, and I'd be happy to help work with you on that with SAF. Okay, on to today's first webinar, Fighting Forest Invasives. Let me introduce both of our speakers before turning it over to them. Tyler Ross is the director of the Madison County Soil and Water Conservation District in North Carolina. He also serves as the vice chair and legislative liaison for a neighboring conservation district. Today, Tyler's going to speak about how the district has utilized good neighbor authority in managing forest invasives in that area. And Dan Shaver is the NRCS state forester for Indiana. He graduated from Purdue with a BS in forestry, spent 9 years working with the Indiana Division of Forestry on public and private forest land. He also served as director for the Brown County Hill Project for the Nature Conservancy from 2002 until 2020. Dan's going to talk about a successful forest invasive program in Indiana that NRCS and the Nature Conservancy coordinate with help from conservation districts in that state. And so with that, let me turn it over to Tyler for his presentation.
All right, thank you, sir. Get this going real quick. All right, is everything coming through good? Just give me a thumbs up if it is. I'll go ahead and tell you to lower your expectations if you were like, man, this is going to be a great PowerPoint presentation, because we changed computers and they updated everything, and I mean, it's not my strong suit. So with my presentation, I'm just going to discuss what we've seen with some of the non-native invasive species in Madison County and working with our other agencies and partners to address it, and the tools that we have available for us to do that. And a lot of us know in our realm, you got the public and the private ownership, and then in the private, you got the ag and non-ag, and how challenging that can make things. So this is what we're working on in Madison County, and hopefully other counties or in districts here in West North Carolina. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard of miscanthus. These are 2 pictures. The one picture to the right on your screen, I hope it's on your right, is looking out a road on a power line cut, and that is all miscanthus that burns every other year. And the flame that burns goes above the lines, and there's been many times where they've had to come in and replace those lines. And in our area, miscanthus is it loves fire, and it creates a lot of intense wildfires in Madison County particularly. And my buddy Bo is the county ranger for Madison County, and I want to say it's over 70% of our wildfire calls are caused by miscanthus in the county. And in some of the areas, it's very, very, very thick. There's cattle pastures that are 50, like the big pastures we have are about 50 acres, and all it is miscanthus. And so it's caused quite a bit of an issue. And the other problem is we don't really know how to address it, how to eradicate it, because it seems to just pop up in different areas. And then how the different methods we've used, some have been successful, some have not. And a lot of it comes back to site specific and a lot of unknowns. So the other part of the resource concerns that we have there is land ownership and the removal techniques, which I touched. But with land ownership, About 53,000 acres in Madison County is part of the Appalachian Ranger District of the Pisgah National Forest. And we're starting to see areas on the National Forest where miscanthus is starting to come on. And in 2016, we had quite a bit of wildfires in an area that if miscanthus made it over to that area, because it's more of a xeric site, very dry, more pine ecosystem dominant, like with the table and stuff like that. If it got over to that area and became over there, it would be a very large concern for private and public land. So we've been working on looking at how can we fix it. And as I'm sure Dan will touch on, there's cost share programs. We work directly with the NRCS in our office for EQIP, and there's invasive species practices where you can go in and do some mitigation. But with miscanthus, it's still up in the air, and we don't have enough information on how to effectively work on addressing it with our landowners. So all those resource concerns led to us trying to figure out how we could work together. So in 2017, well, I'll back up. I believe it was the 2008 Farm Bill had the first version of Good Neighbor Authority that was very just kind of like a pilot. And then I think 2014 was when they expanded it to state agencies or state government. In North Carolina, our state forest agency is with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And they entered into a Good Neighbor Authority agreement to look at doing practices for projects on federal land, on U.S. Forest Service land in North Carolina that had already had an environmental impact statement and had already had an environmental assessment and essentially were shovel ready. And with the North Carolina Forest Service, a lot of it was timber cruises, assisting with some burns, and then other forest health things that they were focusing on more. In 2018, with the Farm Bill, expanded from just state government to county and tribal government. In 2017, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services in North Carolina expanded their agreement with the North Carolina U.S. Forest Service system in North Carolina, to where the NCDA and CS, Division of Soil and Water Conservation, could then start working with districts within different national forests. So in North Carolina, we have 4 national forests. We have the Nantahala and the Pisgah, which are on the western end of the state, the Uwharrie, which is in the Piedmont area down near Charlotte, and then the Croatan that's on the coast. So with all those things, or with all that, we were trying to figure out different ways that we could work together to assist the Forest Service. And so Steve Troxler, our Commissioner of Agriculture for the state, signed an agreement with the U.S. Forest Service in North Carolina for us to work. And so far, we have one agreement that was in Transylvania County. They're working on a stream crossing on the Forest Service, and they're using district personnel and division staff to get that going. And it opened up the ability for us to look at other partnerships that we could work with them on. And in Madison County, invasives is the #1 issue. On Forest Service property right now, miscanthus is on a couple of tracks, but we have autumn olive, Chinese privet, Japanese knotweed, and just a huge list. And so the good thing about it is there's so many invasives that the project list is very easy for us to find, and there's a lot of opportunity. The problem is with some of these species, it's very difficult to work on eradication because, as we all know, like with invasives, eradication is a goal, but that doesn't mean it's achievable. We might have to look at keeping certain species in check and minimizing their range down and stuff like that. But with the one in particular with miscanthus, it's very difficult. So the other part of the Good Neighbor Authority is it assists or it compensates the state, county, and tribal agencies for work that's done on U.S. Forest Service land. So instead of in some instances, we've had private contractors come in and bid, and it's just too much for the USDA budget because it still comes back. I'm sure you're all aware EWP comes from the USDA budget. Wildfire Fighting Out West comes from the USDA budget. So they just keep on tweaking that USDA budget down, and we have to get kind of creative on how we can help. So we're able to come in and do it at a lower rate with, with my office in particular. The two of us have a background in working with them. So we're able to make that taxpayer dollar go a little bit further, I think. So right now, I guess I'll go back and just talk about the Good Neighbor Authority, where we're at. The current project is, we're looking at, we'll just go forward. Again, there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration. The first bullet point I got there is, it'd be awesome if the next Farm Bill names conservation districts as eligible entities to enter into a Good Neighbor Authority agreement with the Forest Service. Because right now, the way it works is the U.S. Forest Service has an agreement with the North Carolina Department of Ag and Consumer Services. And our division office is amazing. Vernon Cox and Megan Tremnell, they oversee this, and they've been over backwards to help us get this going. But there's a lot of paperwork and a huge paper trail, and it takes forever to get an agreement going. So that would be amazing if we could get it changed to where districts were able just to enter into that agreement with the U.S. Forest Service the same way that a state, tribal, or a county government is. The reason that we looked at the partnership is, I have a Southern Appalachian dialect quote for you that I'm going to coin. Maybe I'll put it on a t-shirt, I don't know yet. But it's, egos are stupid, silos are stupider. And what I mean by that is, a lot of the stuff we run into is, that I've come across is, there's a lot of silos with a lot of different agencies and a lot of different partners. And there's a lot of egos that prevent, or I don't think they're intentional egos, but there's a lot of things that keep work from getting done with partners. And when we're within silos, we don't get a whole lot of stuff done. So we've been able to partner with quite a few people on this. And I've mentioned the U.S. Forest Service, the Division of Soil and Water Conservation with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, my office, and then Madison County. And what's been amazing is all of these partners were all ready to work, ready to go with it. And we've had a lot of awesome things that have come from that. Currently, right now, we have entered into a special project agreement, which is a SPA. And as you all know, with working with the government, we're never going to be in short supply of acronyms. I think that's like a prerequisite to work with the government, is you got to understand acronyms and come up with your own. So we have a special project agreement right now that we're working with the Forest Service on, and it's 9 acres of the Forest Service office for the Appalachian Ranger District, which is right off of I-26 going through Western North Carolina. And it is ground zero for miscanthus infestation in the mountains of North Carolina. And that 9 acres is covered with miscanthus and other invasives. So what that gives us the opportunity to do is go in there and map out different prescriptions on different parts of it, to where we're able to study, see how it does, what works, what didn't work, what's coming back, and things to where we can scale it from a smaller entities or smaller farms or smaller property where people are wanting to look at different ways to address it or take care of it on their property without having to use certain methods that folks may or may not be a fan of with chemical use, to where we can also look at it on a larger scale for the large farms or larger forest stands where we're starting to see miscanthus pop up. So right now we're in the stage where the paperwork has been, all the I's have been dotted, the T's have been crossed, and everybody's ready to rock. And we're just waiting to get all that paperwork signed. Everybody's on the same page, and then we're waiting for spring, and we're going to start on the project. Right now, the way that looks is me and my counterpart, Richard, will start going in and working with the botanist on the Appalachian Ranger District, Susan, to look at the areas, lay out where we're going to do, I guess, our research, and agree upon what practices we can utilize that are within the compass of the environmental impact statement, environmental assessment that's already existing for some of the uses and some of the pesticide or herbicide use that's going to be used. The good thing about this is, with this project, we're also have potential for many more spas on so many other parts of the Appalachian Ranger District. And we're really kind of the pilot, I guess, for our state on how this works, so that we can lay the groundwork for other districts to hop on and help, because we're firm believers in many hands make light work. So that's a lot of the good stuff. That's like a 30,000 foot overview of what we've got going on. I can talk about this all day, but I was trying to keep it underneath the 15 to 20 minute mark, and I think I've hit it. So feel free to give me a holler anytime. This is my information, my email, my cell phone number, and my office number. And if any of this you can't find, reach out to Mike. He knows how to get a hold of me. And thank y'all for your time. And Mike, how do I pass the stuff to Dan? I'm sorry.
It's fine. He can just start and he should be able to share when he needs to.
Yep. All right, so hopefully that is showing up now. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Shaver, and I am the State Forester for Indiana for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. I'm excited to be here with you all today to talk a little bit about the Indiana Invasive Initiative. It's a program that we started in Indiana a few years ago. It's kind of a nice innovative program that works on some of the stuff Tyler talked about, breaking down those silos and allowing us to work across property lines with different land holding agencies, county, state, federal, private landowners. And it's working well for us in Indiana. So it's a real collaborative effort to improve land management across Indiana. It's a program that's the three main partners are really the USDA, NRCS, the Nature Conservancy, and then an organization we call SICM, which is the Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasive Management. It's a regional group that is looking at education and outreach across Southern Indiana. So let me jump in here and tell you a little bit. Let me set the stage first in Indiana. For those of you that aren't from Indiana, Indiana is a state that was at one point in time, it was about 85% forest land. We went through the settlement and conversion stage. And by the late 1800s, early 1900s, we were down to about 6% forest land in Indiana. Since that time, we've rebounded. We're up to about 20% forest land in Indiana. And we seem to be holding stable in that area, even with the conversion and loss of forest land that still happens today. We're doing a fair amount of reforestation and afforestation to make up for some of those losses. But the majority of our forests in Indiana have recovered since the early 1900s and mid 1900s. And so they reestablished with a lot of invasive species that were planted intentionally to help reestablish forest and wildlife cover, invasive species that were used for erosion, invasive species that escaped from urban areas. And so we have a wide degree of infestation within our forests in Indiana. Some are very heavily forested, some are very sparsely or heavily invaded with invasive species. Some of them are sparsely invaded, but just about every woods you go to in Indiana, you're going to find some invasive species somewhere. And our landscape with only 20% forested is very fragmented. We have a lot of agricultural land with little woodlots scattered here and there. We have some blocks of contiguous forest, but overall it's a pretty fragmented landscape with fairly small parcel sizes. And so when we start dealing with invasive species, we run into those problems that Tyler was talking about, that there are different agencies that own different lands. There's a lot of private landowners to work with. And as most of us know, working with invasive species, it can be pretty all-consuming at times, and sometimes it can be pretty frustrating. And many of you have probably gone through those times where you're excited and energized by the results you see from controlling invasive species. And then there's other times where you're deflated and ready to throw in the towel. You've probably been hot, sweaty, cut, bruised, tick covered, laying face down on the forest floor with a backpack sprayer on your back after you tripped, and just tired of fighting this difficult invader that we have in our forest. But it's necessary work. It's something we've got to do, and we've got to keep trying to come up with ways to do a better job of treating and controlling invasive species. And sometimes I think it helps to look back a little bit and see where you have been within your state and how things are advancing. When I look back at my career over the last 25 years, when I first started in forestry, there was very little work I was doing to control invasive plants. I would write forest management plans and I might mention invasive species, but I really didn't have a good way to treat them or a good way to control them, a good way to tell landowners to control them. But that's really been changing in Indiana. We now have several options out there. And let me see, I'm having trouble getting my screen to change. Oh, there it goes. So we have several different options out there in Indiana. Some big things that have happened in Indiana that I consider to be pretty big wins for Indiana is that in 2019, we passed the invasive terrestrial plant rule in Indiana. This made it illegal to buy, sell, and trade certain invasive plants in Indiana. This has been a huge win for Indiana. We've also had some pretty stable conservation funding over the last few years. And really since 2008, a lot of the Farm Bill programs have been well funded and there's been a significant amount of money available to treat invasive species on private lands. And having that sustainable, that funding that's there every year where you can plan and do multiple years of treatments on private landowners' property has been a big win for Indiana. And then one of the biggest wins I think we have had has been this Indiana Invasives Initiative, getting started with this agreement, which is a contribution agreement between the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service and the Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasive Management Group, SICM. And if you're not familiar with a contribution agreement, these are fairly common agreements within the federal government and within USDA. They do require a match from the private partner that's involved in the agreement. In this case, it was a match from the Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasive Management Group. And the purpose of this contribution agreement was to promote the awareness and control of invasive plants in Indiana, to educate the public and establish these cooperative invasive species management areas. We call them CISMAs. There go those acronyms across the state. And so within this contribution agreement, it's a 5-year agreement between NRCS and SICM. NRCS is providing 50% of the funding for this agreement. We're also providing the technical level of oversight to ensure our NRCS standards are met, programmatic oversight between the different Farm Bill programs. We are enrolling customers in Farm Bill programs if they are driven to us from this agreement. And then we are approving the work that gets done on the ground and checking up on this agreement to make sure that all the deliverables are being met. From the private side, SICM has to come up with 50% of the value. So they've had to come up with in-kind donations, private grants, money from local conservation districts. There's a lot of different ways that they've been able to raise their 50% of the funding. And while raising that money, they also had to hire four full-time invasive species regional specialists, a part-time coordinator. They had to reach out to all 92 counties in Indiana and try and establish 12 new CISMAs each year. They are developing management plans and targeting landowners with less than 10 acres. So in our fragmented landscape in Indiana, that less than 10-acre group of landowners is not a group that's served very well by some of our other public agencies and organizations. And so this was an area we thought we could make a difference, because the invasive species really don't care if they're spreading from a national forest, a state park, or a 5-acre parcel of land. They're going to keep producing seeds and it's going to get spread across the landscape. So we're really targeting the smaller landowners with this initiative, putting on a lot of educational events across the state, developing educational materials, and doing a lot of site visits to actually get out there and talk to landowners and help them identify invasive species and help them understand what they can do on their property. This outreach and training across the state has been a big help for Indiana. This agreement, it kind of came about in Indiana, I'd say the mid-2000s, 2006, 2007. A lot of our local county conservation districts were starting to work with private partners to figure out how they could control invasive plants in their counties. And they started developing these local volunteer groups that were doing education events, hosting field days, doing invasive surveys, getting out and talking to landowners, but they weren't real well structured or established, and they were slow to get started because there really wasn't a good path or a process for them to follow to get established. And that really changed with this contribution agreement. This contribution is aimed at taking those initial counties that started doing these volunteer SISMAs and amplifying what they were doing, coming up with a process that allows that development of these county level groups to really spread across the state of Indiana. And it's been pretty successful. And so now I would like to turn it over to Dawn Slack. She's on this call. She is the coordinator for the Indiana Invasives Initiative. She is the stewardship coordinator for the Nature Conservancy in Indiana. And she has really been driving this contribution agreement and helping get stuff done on the ground. And so Dawn, if you would like to go from here, I'll change the slides when you need to, but go ahead and take over and introduce yourself.
All right, Dan, thank you very much. And I'm just going to jump in because I've got some great information to share with you about this agreement and what we've been doing here in Indiana. And Tyler, I hate miscanthus. I'm starting to see it everywhere. And it scares me half to death because I know it's a fire hazard. I was actually doing some mapping of it yesterday. So the contribution agreement, the III is what we call it, the Indiana Invasives Initiative. We've been going for about 4 years. We're on our last year of the agreement. So I'm going to cover what we've been doing. And it's a wonderful team of people that have been out there on the ground working hard with a lot of individuals across the state. So we currently have 6 regional specialists. So we've exceeded the 4. I'm going to tell you 6 probably isn't enough. That part-time project coordinator, she works full-time. I'll just lay that out there as well. And then we have a brand new executive director that just started with us. And of course we have the SICM board. And together we work with a lot of partners just across the state, you name it, many industries, businesses, as well as our state agencies, our DNR. We are working with just about anybody who is interested and wants to do something when it comes to invasive species management, and sometimes even when they don't want to. So we currently have what we consider to be a SISMA, and I'll define that, are 33 SISMAs representing about 36 counties in Indiana. And those are the blue on the map on the right. And we're working in about 71 counties total across the state. So they've raised their hand. We have not been soliciting these folks primarily. They raised their hand and said, there's a problem, let me be part of the solution. If you look at the map, the blue indicates those counties that are what we call formed and active. Thank you, Dan. And those counties have a written statement. They've got a name. Most of them have a logo. They meet on a regular basis. They've got committees that they formed, and they have written annual goals and metrics, and they're providing outreach. And I'm just going to tell you that the majority of these SISMAs are comprised of volunteers. So as we move through this, keep that in the back of your mind. The orange indicates a county that they're going through that organizational process. So they're finding their partners, or they've gathered their partners, and they're starting to talk about a mission statement. What are we going to call ourselves? What will our goals and objectives be? So they're working through that process. And then the green counties are those that have pretty much raised their hand and said, you know what? Yes, we want to be a part of this. Let's see what partners we can come up with. And in the meantime, we're going to do outreach. We're going to let our citizens of our county know that we have an invasive species problem. We want them to know what invasive species are and the impact so that they can start supporting the formation of a SISMA. Next slide. So over this past almost 4 years, we have conducted over 450 landowner surveys and provided technical assistance. Actually, we're over 500, but I need to tweak numbers, so I was comfortable saying 450. And that's having written a plan or provided technical assistance for over 18,000 acres. And as Dan mentioned, our focus is for that 10 acres or less, but we work on anybody that calls, we help. It doesn't matter if it's an agency, it doesn't matter if it's a landowner that has 1,000 acres or more. If they would like to be part of the program, we will come out, we will walk and talk the land with them, understand what their priorities are for their land, and then we address their priorities and talk about invasive species impact. We have done or completed over 700 outreach events. We have completed over 3 SISMA conferences. We do quarterly calls with our SISMAs. We provide annual training, both regionally, locally, and statewide. We have a website and a newsletter. And really the good stuff is that not only have we found new invasives and new infestations, which maybe that's not so good, like the infestation there in the middle is Japanese barberry. And we didn't know that we had such large infestations in the state of Indiana. So we're finding those, but that means we can now address them. We can own the problem, but we're also finding new populations of rare species, and that's empowering our citizens for action. There's a reason that we're doing this, and they can see it. Some of them have it on their land, and they can own that responsibility and feel really good. The map on the right are just the dots, landowner surveys, and technical assistance that we provided. It's not all of them, but it gives you an idea of where we're working across the state. Next slide. One of the things that we are working with our SISMAs and trying to provide some easy platforms to get them started, because again, we're working with volunteers. Not all of these people have a botany background or an ecological background or a forestry background, but we do try to make sure those partners are engaged in each SISMA that we form. So we need to give them an easy platform, and Weed Wrangle, which was started in Tennessee with the Garden Society there out of Nashville, has been a platform that we have been able to use here in Indiana. We do it on a statewide, and we do it through a single coordinator. And we use it again as a platform for our SISMAs to get out there and work in the public green space. So in those beloved parks and green spaces that our citizens love to visit, they've got problems. And a Weed Wrangle allows some education as well as some work. So bringing in capacity to help those green space partners manage invasive species. And that's really what a Weed Wrangle is about. It's a volunteer event. It happens nationwide now. So they've gone from being just a local small event to a nationwide event. So not only in Indiana are we working locally in many counties as we can, in as many local state parks or county parks or city parks, but we're also part of a collective national effort. We've conducted over 100 in 2021, and I'm just going to tell you that's more than I really ever thought that we could do in a year. We're actually at 121 right now, and that's a tremendous workload, but it's amazing. And we've done over 200 over the last 3.5 years. And we're just now starting to have those partners, those green space partners, like the local park in Columbus, give us a value, a monetary value of the work that we've done. An event is typically 3 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours. And in one event at Mill Race, we removed so much biomass, they actually came and had us stop because we had overloaded the capacity of the city at that park to take care of what we had done. So that was valued at about $5,000. So we're trying to let our citizens see the ecological value as well as a monetary value. Next slide. We not only do we want to work then on the private with our private landowners and get that one-on-one with them and empower them. We also want to do those citizen events at Weed Wrangles, but we need to bring in and marry and partner, collaborate with our scientists. So it's important that we ensure that we are meeting with our scientists, that we're bringing that training, that collaboration, that networking opportunity to our citizens, and then we're marrying those together. So we're not working in silos. We're trying to bring everybody and the information together. And that's what our conferences are about. That's what our training is about. We're not only training just within Indiana, but we're partnering. For instance, during the Chafflower Summit was a partner with Illinois. So we've held 3 SISMA conferences. We're now past a one-day event. We're doing multiple day events where we've got these wonderful SISMAs that feel empowered. And now they've got areas that they're working on. So those become our field days, our in-person training days, as well as having experts talk and provide continuing education credits. So we're just marrying all of that information together to really boost and build capacity for improved land management. Next slide. So last, just to give you one example of what some of our SISMAs are doing, and again, this is just one. They're doing a lot of things. They're mapping invasives, they're putting up billboards, they're doing the outreach. But one of the other things they're doing is this, it's new, the invasive plant management team. And this again is that bread and butter. This is building that capacity. So we're training our SISMA volunteers. They know how to identify, they're learning how to manage. Some of them are certified applicators. They get that group together. So invasive plant management teams are a subcommittee of the SISMA, and they go out and find a local partner, such as a state park, a state forest, a local land trust, even the Christian camp that has an amazing 800-acre rare fin and seed community where we found the only second type of rare rice that we have in the state. And so we're working with these SISMA committee, this invasive plant management team works directly with that. They bring in the experts and they develop a plan for these areas so that where the capacity is limited, the SISMA is stepping in and building that capacity and working on this improved land management across Indiana. And again, this is all about empowering our citizens, taking that responsibility for the health and really for the healthy lands and waters across the state of Indiana, and definitely knowing what that invasive plant list is and learning to address things like miscanthus right off the bat. So that's all I have, Dan. It's back to you.
Thanks, Dawn. That's fantastic. And a lot of this happens at the county Soil and Water Conservation District in Indiana, and they have been a pivotal component of our outreach through the Indiana Invasive Initiative. They are often the people in the county that have contacts within the county. They've been working with a lot of landowners and producers. They have some facilities, they have some resources, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback from the conservation districts. And I put a few quotes up here, you can read them, but a lot of them, you know, focus on the fact that through the III and this outreach campaign that's going statewide is that we're bringing attention to these conservation district boards to let them know how important working locally is when it comes to controlling invasive plants. We're also seeing comments from them that because the III has developed these roadmaps to establish a SISMA and some of the content and some of the education material, the counties are then able to get these groups up and moving quicker. And that just helps them see results sooner. And that helps keep people energized and interested. And so we're getting a lot of great feedback from our conservation districts, and we're always happy to be working with them. So where do we go from now? This is a 5-year agreement. This agreement expires in August of 2022. We have NRCS has already kind of identified and secured the funding for the continuation and expansion of this program. We'll be working with SICM to come up with the match. This is a big lift for them. They've got to come up with 50% of the funding to make this happen through in-kind and private donations. But we're excited about the results we're seeing. We're going to keep working to establish those new SISMAs in this next iteration of this program. But we also want to make sure we strengthen and establish the existing ones. Dawn talked that a lot of them are up and running and they're functioning, but we all know with volunteer groups, there are peaks and valleys. There's times when volunteers leave and you lose some energy, and we don't want to see this work go away. So we want to keep investing in those local SISMAs that are getting established. And then we also want to expand the assistance to NRCS. This is a great use of our funds to leverage the money that SICM's able to raise, the in-kind donate or the in-kind match, to help meet more landowners, to meet more producers, to get more resource concerns addressed. And that's what we're all about, is addressing those resource concerns. So we're excited to see where this goes in the next 5 years. And maybe it's a model that might work for your state or your county to get something like this going. So we appreciate the opportunity to be able to share today, Mike. And I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen and hand it back to you.
Fantastic. Two really good presentations. you know, as I encourage folks now, if you have questions, go ahead and enter those in the chat function. I'll try to manage those. One thing real quick, Dan, for your program, you know, you talked quite a bit about, you know, outreach to folks with fewer than or less than 10 acres and the opportunities there. Obviously, those are folks that probably are ineligible for other cost share programs. So you're reaching a new audience. I'm guessing there's another layer there for education as far as just working with cost share, what that means. People that probably have not been reached before for programs like that. Tell me a little bit more about that experience.
I think it is an opportunity, and you know, I'm guilty as a forester. I tend to want to work with those parcels that I can do more active forest management on, and the larger parcels are easier to manage for timber and wildlife in this. But we have a whole lot of acres that are smaller parcels. And a lot of those landowners, when Dawn and the regional specialists are working with them, some of them just need the information. They need a little bit of assistance to help them identify what those plants are, give them some of the information on how to control them, maybe help them for a little part of a day, and then send them on their own to keep working on it, and they can handle it. There's other times where they do need financial assistance. And fortunately, through a lot of our USDA programs, we can work with those smaller landowners on projects like brush management. We're also seeing some of these counties are getting together, and they're actually coming up with funds to hire people to get out and work in private landowners' properties. We're helping target those smaller county and city parks that may not have the resources to deal with invasives currently. And so I think it is a boon for those smaller property owners, those smaller city and county parks, and a great way for them to get started on controlling invasive plants.
So there's a question in here from Tom Crow. It could be for Dan or Dawn. Can you identify some of the partners that help reach that looks like 3 match? Match.
Let me take that, Dan.
That'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, the III match comes from a lot of different entities. We've got private landowners that help, who recognize the value of this. We have, during our conference, some of our donations also come in and help with that. So sponsorships for the conference, CWI money, State Soil Board helps with that partnership. So there's just a plethora of between agency assistance through some of their grant programs, as well as private landowners or private entities that are donating for this.
Very good. There's also a note in the chat for folks regarding NACD, Gary Blair, who's on this call. More information there about our association, his contact information. I'd mentioned too with Tyler, I think we have a story, and I try to share that while we're on here. We did on his program for Good Neighbor Authority. But Tyler, maybe if you want to touch on that, I do know that NACD has looked at, with the growth of Good Neighbor Authority going from to tribal and also county government, I think we are exploring, is there an opportunity for conservation districts to connect? Can you talk maybe a little bit more in detail about that process in terms of trying, you know, to work through another entity and the paperwork and what you see from your state that might be, we might be able to help streamline that by having a direct possibility with districts?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple different logistics things that have just popped up from it. When we first started pursuing the Good Neighbor Authority, you could only work with state agencies at that time. And it expanded to the county. And at that time, it was not feasible for us to partner up with the county on that. Now things have changed to where we probably could. And probably have reduced the paperwork. But since essentially, in essence, what we're doing is we're subcontracting from the State Department of Ag. And so we're having to go through them, and we had to set up the way that the payment will come through, make sure that we're insured, that we're bonded, and then also that we have the appropriate certifications and everything, which wasn't the issue. It was not hard to get all the certifications we needed, the sawing and bucking, the herbicide applicator license, that was not difficult. the process that's taken the longest time was getting it set up with the state controller's office, I guess the accounting people, the Department of Ag, Madison County, then Madison County Soil and Water Conservation District, and the U.S. Forest Service. So there was 5 entities that had to go through, and they all had to get an agreement. So when they sent the form to me from the U.S. Forest Service, I sent it to the state. The state had to send it to another office, and then it came back to them, and then they had to send it to the county, and then back to my board. And then we went through the whole process, and it honestly added about 4 months to the entire process. Whereas if we were able to enter into the agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, we could walk up, you know, go to the office with them, and just however we needed to have that look, it would just be us, instead of having multiple attorneys from the state, from the county, and all that. So I mean, it did add a lot of layers to it. And then now what happens with the spa, which I'm really hoping we can fast track it, but if we want to expand it to go to another area like Mill Ridge to work on the autumn olive, we've got to do the whole process again, just to update that spa. Whereas if it was just us, I could run from my office in Marshall to them in Mars Hill, sign the paper with my approval from the board, 2-3 days most. Now we're probably looking at 2-3 months quickest.
Wow. Thank you for that. Tammy asked, name some of the invasives we need to be looking for in Indiana. Dan, Don?
Sure. Dawn's look says it all. We got a lot of them. We have all the classic invasive plants here in Indiana, the autumn olive and multiflora rose and the bush honeysuckle. But we do have some of those up and coming species that we want people to keep an eye out for. You know, Miscanthus, it's one of those that we're seeing pop up more along county road rights of way, on interstate rights of way. It's out there. And then there's some other ones that, you know, you hear they're in the southern US and we know they're moving north, and we just want to keep an eye out for them. So there's a whole lot of them. If you go on the SICM website, I see Amber posted it there. There is a lot of resources on that website. You can see kind of the list of Indiana, some of the top 10 species, and a lot of other information. So just a whole lot of them, and it just depends on where you're at in the state, which ones are the worst.
Very good. Any other questions? Quick. Okay, well, I want to thank our speakers today, Tyler and Dan and Dawn. Very informative, and we had a lot of interest for this. Again, this recording will be posted through the NACD website and also on our YouTube channel. So you have that to share. And if you're not signed up, we do have another webinar today at 4 Eastern on programs for forest carbon credits. And so we have a couple of good speakers for that. But I want to thank everybody for attending today, and look for future webinars next spring for NACD. Thank you.